Snow wasn't falling yet when my aunt changed the locks. I didn't know that part until I got home from work. It was a Thursday evening in late January, around 6:45, and I remember because I'd stayed late to finish a quarterly report my manager needed by Friday morning. I was tired in that specific way where your eyes feel like they've been sandpapered. I just wanted to make soup and go to bed. I put my key in the lock and it didn't turn. I tried again. Same thing. I pulled it out, looked at it, same key I'd used for 3 years, and tried a third time. Nothing. I knocked. Then I rang the bell. Then I knocked again. My cousin opened the door. She's 19, my aunt's daughter, and she looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's rung the wrong doorbell, politely confused, waiting for me to realize my mistake and leave. "The locks were changed today," she said. "I live here," I said. She looked back over her shoulder, then back at me. "Mom said you don't anymore." I stood there on the porch in my work coat, laptop bag on my shoulder, the temperature already dropping into the low 30s. January in Ohio doesn't negotiate. It was going to be a hard night, and I was outside it in dress shoes. I want to try to explain what my aunt's house meant before I explain what she did to me, because otherwise none of it makes sense. My mother died when I was 11. My father had been gone before that, not dead, just gone, which is its own kind of loss. My aunt, my mother's older sister, took me in. She wasn't warm about it. She wasn't the aunt who baked things or came to school plays. She was practical and stern, and she made it clear from the beginning that I was a responsibility she was meeting, not a child she was choosing. But she kept a roof over my head. She fed me. She made sure I finished high school. What she never told me was that when my mother died, she left something behind. My mother had a life insurance policy, $180,000. My aunt was the trustee. I didn't find out about that until I was 24, and only because a letter arrived at the house addressed to me from a law firm in Columbus. My aunt intercepted most of my mail, but she must have been distracted that week because it slipped through. The letter said that a trust established in my name would become fully accessible to me upon my 25th birthday, and that I should contact the office to confirm my mailing address and identification. My 25th birthday was 4 months away. I never told my aunt I'd received the letter. I called the law firm from my car, parked 2 blocks from the house. The attorney, a woman named Ms. Hargrove, explained everything carefully. My mother had set it up before she got sick, had named a family friend as co-trustee alongside my aunt, specifically because she'd wanted a check on the process. The original $180,000 had been conservatively invested for 14 years. It was now worth considerably more. "How much more?" I asked. She told me. I sat in my car for a long time after that call. The thing about growing up the way I did is that you develop a very specific relationship with money. You're always aware of owing it, always aware of not having enough of it, always aware that your position in any household depends on someone else's generosity and their willingness to keep extending it. I had a job. I worked in data analysis for a mid-sized logistics company, had been there 2 years, made decent money for someone my age. But I was still living in my aunt's house because when I tried to move out at 22, she had cried. She had said she couldn't afford to keep the house on her income alone. She had said I was abandoning her after everything she'd done. So I stayed. I paid rent. I paid a portion of the utilities. I bought groceries twice a month. And I told myself this was what family meant, that you stayed even when staying was hard. What I didn't know then was that my aunt had been withdrawing small amounts from my trust for years. Not the principal, the earnings on the investments. She had access as trustee, and apparently she'd been taking $400 or $500 at a time, several times a year, consistently since I was in high school. Ms. Hargrove explained this carefully, in the tone of someone who had been waiting to explain it. The co-trustee had flagged it 18 months ago. There was documentation. There was going to be an accounting. Does she know? I asked. We sent a formal notice to all trustees 60 days ago, Ms. Hargrove said. Yes, she knows. So she knew. She'd known for 2 months that I was about to turn 25 and receive a sum of money large enough to make me independent. She'd known that there was documentation of what she'd done, and apparently her response to that information was to change my locks on a Thursday in January and have her daughter tell me I didn't live there anymore. My cousin was still standing in the doorway. I could smell dinner cooking behind her, something with garlic. I need my things, I said. Mom said to tell you your stuff will be in boxes on the porch by Saturday. It's January, I said. She closed the door. I stood there for another minute. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I think I was too cold and too tired and too something I don't have a word for. I thought about calling the police. I thought about whether that would work, whether I had enough documentation of living there, whether I even had the energy for whatever came next. Then I called Miss Hargrove. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting my call. She changed the locks, I said. I know, Miss Hargrove said. I had a feeling she might try something before the 30th. My birthday was January 30th. Are you somewhere safe right now? I looked down the street. A neighbor's porch light was on. A car drove past, too fast for the neighborhood. I'm on the porch, I said, outside. There was a pause. Then, stay where you are. I'm sending someone. I didn't know what that meant. I thought maybe she meant a colleague or someone from the law firm. I sat down on the top porch step and pulled my coat tighter and waited. The temperature had dropped another 2 degrees at least. I waited for 40 minutes. The car that pulled up was not what I expected. It was a black SUV, clean and quiet, and when the door opened, the man who stepped out was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He was followed by a woman in her late 60s, my mother's aunt, my great-aunt Sylvia, who I had met exactly twice in my life and both times at funerals. I didn't even know she was still alive, honestly. I knew she existed. My mother had mentioned her occasionally, the family member who'd moved away decades ago, who'd built something in Atlanta, who sent Christmas cards that no one sent cards back to. My aunt, the one who changed my locks, had always referred to her with a particular kind of dismissiveness that I now understood was probably about money. Sylvia looked at me sitting on the porch step in my work coat, and her face went very still. How long have you been out here? She asked. About 40 minutes, I said. She looked at the house. Then she looked at the man in the suit who was already on his phone. That's Mr. Caldwell, she said. He's my attorney, and mine has been talking to yours for about 6 weeks now. I stood up. My legs were stiff from the cold concrete. I didn't know you were involved in this. Miss Hargrove contacted me when the discrepancies were flagged, Sylvia said. I was named in your mother's original estate documents. She wanted me to know what was supposed to happen to that money. She paused. I didn't know it hadn't. Mr. Caldwell ended his call and came to stand beside her. He had a leather portfolio under his arm and the patient, unreadable expression of someone who resolves situations like this professionally and regularly. Ms. Hargrove filed the formal complaint with the probate court this morning, he said, addressing me directly. Given the evidence of misappropriation and the current circumstances, he glanced at the locked door. We're prepared to move quickly. Your aunt does not own this house. Your mother's estate made a significant contribution to its purchase, which was documented and which your aunt signed off on. That documentation is now part of the probate filing. I stared at him. She doesn't own the house, not outright. No. He opened the portfolio and showed me a page. 40% of the original down payment came from a joint account your mother held with your aunt. Your mother's share was never formally transferred. It's been in legal limbo for 14 years because nobody pushed on it. We're pushing on it now." I looked at the front door. I thought about my cousin's face, politely confused, waiting for me to leave. "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means," Sylvia said, "that she needs to talk to us. Tonight." Mr. Caldwell rang the bell. It took 3 rings before my aunt answered. She opened the door and saw me first, and her expression did something complicated, a flash of something that might have been guilt or might have been calculation, and then she saw Sylvia and it went flat. "Eleanor," Sylvia said. She used my aunt's name the way you'd set down something heavy. "You have no business being here," my aunt said. "Actually," Mr. Caldwell said pleasantly, "we have quite a bit of business here. May we come in?" We came in. My cousin had disappeared somewhere in the back of the house. The TV was on in the living room, some reality competition show muted now. The dinner smell was stronger inside, definitely garlic, pasta of some kind. Normal Thursday evening. Like I hadn't been sitting on the porch for 40 minutes in January. My aunt stood in the middle of her own living room with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and I recognized the look. I'd spent 14 years trying to avoid causing that look. I'd paid rent I couldn't always afford, stayed home on weekends to help with things she could have done herself, talked myself out of moving into my own place twice. That look had shaped my entire adult life. It didn't land the same way now for some reason. Mr. Caldwell set his portfolio on the coffee table and opened it. "I'll be brief," he said. "The probate filing covers 3 separate issues. First, the trust distributions. There were 11 unauthorized withdrawals between 2014 and 2022, totaling approximately $6,200. Second, the estate's interest in this property, which was never properly transferred and which gives Ms., he nodded at me, a legitimate claim to co-ownership. Third, a petition to appoint a neutral trustee to oversee the final distribution of the trust assets on her upcoming birthday." My aunt looked at me. "You did this." "The co-trustee flagged it," I said. "I just found out it existed." "I kept you," she said. "I raised you." "I didn't have to do any of that." "I know," I said, "and I did know. I'd known my whole life. It was the weight I'd carried in every room of that house. And I was grateful, and I paid rent for 3 years. And none of that makes what you took okay. It was barely anything. It was my mother's money," I said. "She left it for me. She planned it so it would be there when I was old enough. And you took pieces of it for 14 years and didn't tell me it existed." The room was quiet. The muted TV showed someone crying on a stage. "Here is what happens next," Mr. Caldwell said, in the tone of someone wrapping up a meeting. "The probate process will proceed regardless of what's decided tonight. What can be decided tonight is whether this is resolved cooperatively or whether we proceed to a formal hearing, which will take longer and be more expensive for everyone." He looked at my aunt. "We'd like to propose a repayment agreement for the unauthorized withdrawals. The property interest question will be settled by the court either way, and in approximately 11 days, the trust assets will transfer to their rightful owner under neutral oversight." My aunt looked at Sylvia. "You always thought you were better than us." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "I thought Linda deserved better," she said. "Linda was my mother's name. I still do, just the version of that I can still do something about." My aunt signed the repayment agreement that night. I don't know if she did it because she thought it would help her case, or because she was too tired to fight, or because some part of her knew she'd been wrong for a long time. She didn't apologize. I hadn't expected her to. Sylvia had booked me a room at a Marriott nearby. She'd done it before they came, apparently, which meant she'd planned for the possibility that I'd be locked out. The thought of that, of someone thinking 2 steps ahead on my behalf was almost harder to take than the rest of it. I wasn't used to that. While Mr. Caldwell finished the paperwork, I went upstairs and packed what I needed for the next week. My room looked the way it always had, functional, not quite settled, like I'd always known I was temporary here. Maybe I had known. Maybe you always know. I took my work laptop, my files, the box of my mother's things I'd kept in my closet for 14 years, letters she'd written, a photograph, a scarf she'd worn that still impossibly smelled like her if I held it the right way. I put them in my bag and carried them down and didn't look back at the room. Sylvia walked with me to the car. The street was quiet now, late enough that the neighbor's porch light had gone off. "She's going to say you manipulated this," Sylvia said. "Just so you know, she's going to make herself the victim." "I know," I said. "She's been doing that my whole life." "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly. "I will be," I said. "I think I've been not okay for a long time and just didn't know it was an option to be different." Sylvia put her hand briefly on my arm. She was not a demonstrative person, I could tell. She and my aunt had that in common, whatever else they didn't share. But the gesture was real. "Your mother would be very angry right now," she said, "and also very proud." I got in the car and they drove me to the hotel, and I sat on the hotel bed with my coat still on for a while, just existing in a room that was mine for the night and nobody else's, and I thought about the woman who'd planned 14 years ahead to make sure I'd be okay. Who'd never gotten to see whether it worked. It worked, Mom. Just sideways. Just late. My birthday was 11 days later. January 30th. I turned 25 in Miss Hargrove's office in Columbus, which sounds depressing but wasn't, entirely. She brought coffee, and there was paperwork, and it took most of the morning. The trust transferred cleanly. The neutral trustee signed off. The amount, after 14 years of growth, was enough to change the shape of my life. Enough for a down payment on my own place. Enough to pay off my student loans completely. Enough to have a margin I'd never had before. I found an apartment in 2 weeks. 3rd floor, natural light, a kitchen big enough to actually cook in. I signed the lease on a Tuesday and picked up the keys and stood in the empty space for a while, just listening to how quiet it was. My aunt texted me once, about a month after everything. It said, "I hope you're happy now." I thought about the right response for a long time. I thought about everything I could say, about fairness, about my mother, about 14 years of carrying a debt I didn't know had been manufactured. What I wrote back was, "I'm working on it." Then I put my phone down and finished unpacking my kitchen and made dinner in my own space, in my own time, with nobody else's needs factoring into it. The scarf is on a hook by my front door now. I see it every time I leave. I'm working on it, Mom. I really am. I've thought a lot about the moment my aunt signed that repayment agreement. She didn't look at me when she did it. She looked at the table, at the pen, at some middle distance that probably felt safer than my face. And I remember thinking, this is what 14 years of choices looks like when they finally catch up. Not dramatic, not loud, just a woman signing a piece of paper in her own living room in a house she thought was hers, while her niece stood 3 feet away holding a box of her dead mother's things. That's how consequences actually arrive. Not like lightning, more like a bill that's been accumulating interest the whole time you were pretending it didn't exist. I don't think my aunt is a monster. I've spent a lot of time working through that, and I keep landing in the same place. She made a choice when I was 11. She took me in, fed me, kept the lights on, and then she made another choice, quietly, year after year, to take something that wasn't hers. Those 2 things both happened. They don't cancel each other out. You can be grateful for what someone gave you and still reckon honestly with what they took. Holding both is harder than picking one, but it's the only version that's actually true. What I keep coming back to is my mother. She was sick when she set that trust up. She knew she was running out of time, and instead of spending those last months in fear, she spent them planning, finding the right attorney, naming a co-trustee she trusted, documenting everything carefully so that 14 years later, a letter could arrive in the right mailbox at the right moment and change the shape of her daughter's life. That's not luck. That's someone deciding that the most useful thing she could do with the time she had left was think clearly and act carefully on behalf of someone else. That kind of intelligence, the kind that plans past its own ending, is something I think about whenever I'm tempted to be reactive instead of deliberate. My aunt reacted. She panicked when the letter came from the law firm, panicked when she realized the accounting was coming, and her panic led her to change the locks on a Thursday in January and make everything worse. My mother planned. Quietly, thoroughly, without anyone watching, she built something that would outlast her. I want to be the kind of person who plans. I also think about what it cost me to stay as long as I did. I told myself it was loyalty. I told myself it was family. But I think some of it was just that I didn't believe I was allowed to want more. Didn't believe I had the standing to say, this isn't enough for me. That belief came from somewhere, and it didn't come from nowhere. Sylvia's hand on my arm in that cold street, the hotel room key, the lease I signed 6 weeks later. None of those things erased the years. But they were proof that different was possible. Sometimes that's what you need first, not the thing itself, just the proof that the thing can exist. I'm still working on believing I deserve it without needing someone to hand me documentation first. That's the part I'm still learning. And I think I will be for a while. And that's okay.